Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon to be with us here today. This is Roxanne Young-Kimball, supervisor of the Minneapolis Homes program. Just want to say thank you for being here and welcome. Kevin is going to go ahead and take the lead on doing the presentation, and I'll be available for questions after the presentation. So with that, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Roxanne. As she stated, I am Kevin Canase, and I am one of our Minneapolis Homes program staff and the direct point of contact for our Minneapolis Homes financing program. So today I'm going to walk us through the Minneapolis Homes financing program and what it is. We'll talk about some development examples that are possible with the program and the application dates, navigating the program webpage, the application documents. We'll walk through completing an example pro forma that is submitted with the application, and then I will be taking any questions. Wanted to just share that this training will be recorded and will be posted online. It will also be available through automatic translation via Microsoft in languages such as Spanish, Hmong, and Russian. And the city also has phone numbers for Spanish, Hmong, and Somali to call the 311 service for help with free translation of information on the city's webpage, including the program webpage for Minneapolis Homes financing. I will share specific numbers later on in the presentation for that translation service. So Minneapolis Homes is our 1 to 20 unit home ownership development financing program. Developments can be new construction, rehabilitation of vacant structures, or stabilization of owner-occupied homes, or renters wishing to purchase the rental unit. Financing is available for units that are affordable to households at or below 80% of area median income. And I'll walk through what those numbers look like here in just a second. And we have deeper subsidy that's available for projects that serve lower area median income households. City-funded units must be sold to income-eligible households, and the current maximum income is 80% of area median income, which is defined by HUD. This income level does vary by the size of the household, so as the household size increases, so does the income. Not all units in a development proposal are required to be at that affordable level, but any unit that you're requesting financing from the city for must be sold to a household at or below 80% of area median income. And at least 10% of the units in whatever development you're proposing must be affordable to those households. In order to apply for funding, there are some things you need to demonstrate first, and that includes that you have the ability to pay for the project. So how our program works is we're providing gap financing, and then you would need to secure another source of financing, which I will talk through a little bit more in detail later during this presentation. You can show financing with a pre-approval letter or pre-qualification letter from a bank, among other items. And like I said, we'll talk through that a little bit more in detail as we go through the application. Second, we want to know that you or someone you're working with on your team has recent experience doing a similar project. If you don't have similar experience, it's possible to partner with a general contractor, developer, or hire a consultant to advise you on your project. And we have had some participants that go through that method. So let's say if you're a new developer looking to participate in the program, and you don't have real estate development experience, one good method that we've seen some developers or new developers follow is by working with a general contractor that has experience. And I will share a list of developers and general contractors that have participated in our program in the past. And that's something that you could reference to if you're new to development with the city. And then we also want to know that if you are a developer or if you own rental units or units within the city, that you are responsible. So that would include that you don't own a lot of vacant buildings or rental license violations exist on any buildings you own, and that you don't have a lot of tax delinquent properties. If you do, this program might not be for you, but I'm happy to talk with you further if you have any concerns. And then finally, if you have any existing contracts or agreements with the city, we want to make sure that you're performing in accordance with that agreement. That's something we'll look at if you are an experienced developer that's looking at applying with the city's program. So the city has approximately 300 vacant lots and approximately $5 million that we're advertising through this notice of funding availability for Minneapolis Homes financing. If you're applying for city-owned land, you are not required to ask for city financing, but there are affordability requirements that apply to all city-owned land, even if no financing is provided. And our city's unified housing policy can provide more guidance on that, as there are different requirements for ownership developments versus rental developments. And please note, when you're going to the webpage, and I'll walk through this a little bit later here, that there are two distinct property lists. So we have one for 1 to 3 unit properties, and then another for 4 to 20 unit properties. And so depending on the size of the proposal that you're looking at, you may want to look at one of those specific lists. So with the Minneapolis Homes program, we've made some changes this year compared to past years, and that includes right-sizing our subsidy commitment based upon the number of bedrooms and the income limit for the housing unit created. So what this chart walks through is the different subsidy and sales price limits that apply based upon the unit size and then the income that you're attempting to serve, or you will be serving if you're applying for city financing. Subsidy amounts can range from as low as $50,000 for a studio serving an 80% AMI household, and then can go to as much as $315,000 for a 4-bedroom or greater size unit serving a 40 AMI and below household. We're right-sizing the subsidy to try to provide an incentive to develop deeper subsidized and more affordable housing for ownership. So we're going to walk through one example, which is what's kind of circled or in the box, and that's a household that makes between $63,000 and $78,000 and wants to purchase a 3-bedroom home. So they would be in the 80% AMI and below bracket. So based on Met Council assumptions, an affordable 3-bedroom home is priced at $253,000, and that price reflects an affordable price that ensures someone in the middle of that income bracket is spending approximately 29% of their income on housing. So in this example, the city would commit up to $90,000 to create that affordable ownership unit. And the amount that the city provides is actually based on demonstrated need. So I'll kind of explain how that works when you're filling out the pro forma. And then there are a couple different paths that a developer can make, or take, I should say, when providing financing to a home buyer. And that could include either a recapture option, which I'll walk through a little bit more, or a perpetually affordable housing option, which is a new fixture of our program. But before I go into those a little bit more, I first want to walk through incentive that we have as part of this application for sustainably certified housing. So this was an incentive that we did offer last year, but after some market study, realized that in order to really incentivize sustainable and ultra efficient building designs, we needed to increase the incentive. So this year, City Council approved an increase of the incentive for 20% of total development costs on a project. And if you're new to development, I'll kind of walk through what that looks like in the pro forma. Not to exceed $90,000 per unit. So that means that an applicant could apply for both the gap financing for the project and then also the sustainability certification incentive to develop a certified home under one of 3 different certification types. So that would be either Passive House Institute, Passive House Institute US, or effectively making a home net zero by installing a solar array, which is solar panels on the roof of the home. There are additional requirements, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are specific ones about that here a little bit later once we get to that point in the presentation. So as I mentioned, there are two different ways we provide financing, affordability gap financing, I should say, to home buyers through our program. And the first is a citywide opportunity that's available on any property, both city-owned and non-city-owned property. And that would be our perpetually affordable housing program. And what the perpetually affordable housing program is a program that insures the home, or it doesn't insure, but it strives to insure, I should say. The market could change drastically, but what the program does is it strives to maintain long-term affordability of that housing unit over time for both the first home buyer and each subsequent home buyer. And how that works is the city provides a significant amount of affordability gap financing at or greater to 20% of the appraised value of the home, so that that home buyer can afford to purchase that home. So how that works is we are effectively lowering the cost of entry of purchasing that home to an affordable level. So in this particular example, we're looking at a home that's $340,000 to develop. And because the market is where it is, it also, in this particular example, appraises for that same amount. In order for it to be affordable to a household at that 61% to 80% AMI target income range, we would need to provide an $87,000 subsidy to reduce the purchase price to $253,000, which that home buyer would then get a 25.5% benefit from that, because we are buying down the price that they have to purchase the home at by 25%, if that kind of makes sense. And so that's generally how our perpetually affordable housing program works. And then there's a shared equity component of it as well. So how that works is that the buyer gets a 2% rate of return compounded yearly. And the reason that it's 2% is because that's generally at the amount incomes have increased within the city of Minneapolis each year over the past 20 years. So it's helping to ensure that the value of that home increases steadily at that rate over time, and then provides that benefit back to the buyer at that 2% rate. So then the next option I'm going to talk about is recapture, which is a little bit different and is only available for city-owned property in North Minneapolis. So, oh, I realized I was looking at the wrong slide. I apologize. I was talking about perpetually affordable housing, and I meant to be talking about recapture. So I'm going to make sure that we're looking at the right slide. So this is the perpetually affordable housing slide that I was just describing. I apologize. I was looking at the wrong slide in my view. So that was what I was just describing, is the program that strives to help the home remain affordable long term. So then the next option, which is the slide we just covered, or that was just visible to you, is our recapture program. And I'm going to go back to that and explain it a little bit more, because even though we were showing that slide, I was actually explaining recapture, and I apologize about that. So our recapture program is specific to city-owned property in North Minneapolis. And the reason that it exists is because prices in North Minneapolis are lower due to compounding factors, including the 2011 tornado, economic devastation that resulted from the foreclosure crisis that disproportionately affected North Minneapolis, and racist policies like redlining that intentionally devalued North Minneapolis community. So those factors are actually why the city does own a lot of lots, and most of those are concentrated in North Minneapolis. So we did a number of stakeholder engagement sessions over the past probably 2 years, and heard clearly from North Minneapolis community members that they wanted to ensure that we had a mix of investment strategies that both ensure perpetually affordable housing, but then also provide affordable unrestricted ownership, which is recapture. So recapture provides a home buyer benefit of less than 15% to the home buyer, and it generally speaking works in North Minneapolis because the values of the homes tend to be lower than in higher priced areas. So the amount of affordability gap subsidy that's required to make it affordable to an income eligible household isn't quite as much. So in this case, we're looking at a affordability gap of 32,000 versus the 87,000 in the last example that I was describing, but unfortunately I had the wrong side shown. In this example, the home buyer is getting an 11% benefit. So like I mentioned, if this goes above 15%, that's where we're kind of kicking into that perpetually affordable housing territory. But with that, I'm going to kind of move along, and this is a lot of detail, especially for new developers. So I'm happy to answer kind of specific questions as they come up, but we'll kind of walk through the application here in a little bit too, and can answer questions at that point as well. And before I do that, just as a reminder, this is the PAH, or perpetually affordable housing option. So the application itself, which we're kind of going to walk through here in just a couple minutes, is due on February 17th at 1 p.m. So that's Wednesday. The program I've been talking about is our Minneapolis Homes financing program, which is specific to home ownership proposals. And we have a general email inbox, Minneapolis Homes, that is managed by multiple individuals. So that's where you would submit your applications once you're doing that. And I'll walk through exactly what an application looks like here in a bit. We do have two other opportunities that we also advertise at the same time. That's our missing middle rental program, and then also a development opportunity at 628 East Franklin. If there are people that are on this and interested in those programs, I'm happy to try to answer any questions that I can, but I would also recommend contacting Jamie Radel to make sure that you're talking to the main point of contact. And then Arlene Robinson, whose email is also on the next slide I'm about to show, also is overseeing the Franklin opportunity. So when we receive awards, we're planning on then bringing them to City Council probably kind of in the second quarter of 2021. And then expect that units would start construction and then become available on the market in about 2022 to 2023, depending on when the type of proposals that come in the timeline that it takes. And kind of as I mentioned, so there are a couple different program options. This one specifically, we're looking at Minneapolis Homes financing, and I'm your main point of contact, but you can send out emails to the Minneapolis Homes. Missing middle, send them to Jamie Radel, and then the East Franklin development opportunity would go to Arlene Robinson. And then I'm going to walk us through some kind of important links before we actually jump into the section where we're going to kind of walk through things, and then I'll take a moment to take questions after this too, before we do that walkthrough, just to make sure that there's not anything that I've missed that anyone has questions on. So Minneapolis Homes has an actual web page called minneapolishomes.org. And so if you click on that link, it'll bring you there. At the top of that page, there is an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter. And if you have not done so, please do so. That is how we market any opportunity through Minneapolis Homes financing, among other opportunities through our Minneapolis Homes program. So that's kind of the one-stop place where we're doing our newsletters. I also mentioned earlier in the presentation that part of your application requires demonstrating financing. And we do have some helpful links for financing products. That includes a link for financing products. If you're looking at rehabbing an existing home, so let's say you're looking at participating through the program to rehab a vacant structure or home that you would then want to sell to an income eligible buyer, you could look at that. We also have a list of financing projects or financing products for new construction homes as well. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the things we look at is that on your application, if you don't have experience, you're partnering with somebody that does have experience. And this list, the second bullet here, participants in Minneapolis Homes that finished a project in the last 3 years, includes a list of general contractor developers that participated in and you could possibly look at that as an opportunity to partner with someone that has some experience. And And then the Minneapolis Homes Financing application link is what takes you to the Minneapolis Homes Financing page. And I'll walk us through that here in the application itself. But before we jump into kind of that part of the call, I wanted to make sure that I'm answering any questions on any of the items that we just covered, and make sure that there's not anything that's outstanding. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is take a look at and see if we have any questions in the chat. And if you aren't aware, there is an opportunity to submit questions via chat. It should be in the upper right-hand corner, and you should see kind of two little square, like talk kind of boxes, one with a question in it. You can click that if you want to send a question that way. Otherwise, if you are calling in, you can unmute yourself by dialing *6, and we're happy to take questions that way. But if there aren't questions, I am also happy to move along too as well. We'll just kind of take a moment to see if there are any questions before we do that, though.
I'm not seeing any questions at this point, Kevin, so I'd suggest going ahead and continuing, and I'll continue monitoring and let you know if there are any that come up.
Sounds great. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation, and I'm going to dive right into the Minneapolis Homes webpage and kind of walk through some helpful areas, and then we'll walk through the application and the pro forma. Okay, just bear with me for a second while I get it up on the screen. Okay. So hopefully you should be seeing my screen here in just a second, if not already. So this is our Minneapolis Homes webpage. So if you had clicked that minneapolishomes.org link, it would have taken you to this page. And on this page, we have a number of different links. So the first thing I mentioned that I want to point out is this newsletter right here. So if you have not signed up for a newsletter, please do so here. And that's where you do that. And then we also have some different property opportunities. So one thing that we do on occasion have are vacant structures that are available. We currently don't have any other than the 628 East Franklin, but we do market those through our listserv. So if you're someone that's done rehab and you're looking at starting through that, it is an entry point to our program. That's definitely a great place to start. We've had a number of developers that have done rehab and have bought a vacant structure through our program, rehabbed it, and then sold it through our program. And it's possible we'll be marketing properties in the future through our program as well. So I definitely, if that seems like the pathway to kind of get on board with our programs, definitely sign up for that newsletter. We also have some links about purchasing homes that are currently under development. So this brings us to a page that shows the different developers and their properties that they're developing, as well as our contact information. So if you were to apply and be building a house through our program, this link would then have your information on here too as one of the developers. And this is just one way that we help developers to market properties. And then it's also a great opportunity for the public to see as well. And then in addition to that, so we have some educational resources too. Before I jumped into the actual application, if you're looking at being a developer, if you're newer, a good place to start is by clicking DTAP. So that's the city's developer assistance, small developers technical assistance program. And it's currently not doing in-person sessions right now due to the pandemic. But the training presentation is available at this link. And then this is actually a link. So sometimes it's kind of hard to notice, but if you click on this actual picture of the curriculum, this is actually the course curriculum for the training. And it's a pretty big document. It's about 100 pages. And it's everything that is provided to developers at the point that they participate in this training. And so that's a great resource if you're just kind of starting out and you kind of want to learn the ropes of development and kind of what this course provides. I definitely would encourage you to take a look at that. And then also the Urban Land Institute does a real estate diversity initiative that I know goes into quite a bit more depth. And so that might be something to look at as well. But with that, I'm going to jump into our Minneapolis Homes financing application. So you would click on, you could do for home buyers or for developers. And then this is our Minneapolis Homes financing page. And as I stated, so the application is due at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the 17th. And when I have developers call me, kind of one of the things I like to start out with them, just because there is a lot to kind of know and there's a lot of information here. I like to kind of walk them through what's on this page and what kind of steps they want to think through. So if somebody's just kind of getting started, we do have applicant training materials that are pre-recorded. Some of it may sound a little bit like this session as some of the material was the same, but they include like an introduction. I think for individuals that are listening to this, if you want to kind of go in more in depth about how like this program and the requirements, this is a great training video, and then these are the slides as well. And then if you're someone that's looking at stabilizing your own housing unit, or know somebody that wants to buy the home they're currently renting, stabilization of occupied housing is that kind of opportunity. And then kind of going down the webpage itself, so we have a number of program documents. We've got a program manual. It's pretty heavy. So if you're taking a look at things, I would maybe start actually with the program guidelines. And the reason I would say that is our program guidelines provide an overview kind of some of the things we discussed and what you can kind of do with this program. But another kind of big thing that's important is our program guidelines on the last page show what our criteria for selection is. So if you're a developer and you're putting together a proposal and you want to know how the city is going to evaluate your proposal, once we're going through that evaluation phase, this is the criteria that we look at. So we're looking at that your project's cost effective. That includes a number of things, looking that you have financing in addition to the city's financing you're asking for, that you're developing something that could be replicable, and that you're meeting affordable housing needs. So like I mentioned, our program has an 80% AMI income limit, but if you're planning on serving households at lower AMI levels, that's something that we would like to see, and we actually provide more financing for that as well, so keep that in mind. We also like to see projects that provide larger units, and that's in particular if you're looking at doing a larger project with multiple units. If you're doing multiple units, we do like to see that at least some of them are larger ones. And then we want to see that your development team has either led projects in the past or has some part of your team that has experience. And then we're also looking at who you're working with as your part of your development team and who you're marketing and outreaching to. So those are important components. And then we're also looking at those design features. And as I mentioned earlier, we do provide an incentive if you're kind of going above the minimum design requirements. So that's a helpful link if you kind of want to look through that if you're getting started and you're wanting to know how we evaluate proposals. And then on this page, we have our lots available. Like I said previously, you can build on a city-owned lot, or you can build on a privately owned lot in Minneapolis as well. But if you're looking at doing a city-owned lot, there are two different sites, or I should say web pages that list the sites that are available. So let's say you wanted to do a single family house. You'd be looking at this 1 to 3 unit studio and development site page. And it brings up a map and then a list. And you can also check if you want to do duplex or triplex or mixed use versus if you want one that does include single family development as well. You can also sort by neighborhood or display by neighborhood. And then one other thing too is that if you want to download this list, you would click download, and then this cross tab is actually downloading into a CSV, which is basically an Excel file. I actually just learned that the other day. And so that is an opportunity if you want to download this list and be able to sort it or make notes or anything like that as you're taking a look at lots. And then there's some more information about that incentive. And then this is the subsidy price and affordable price limits chart. I'll kind of explain filling in your pro forma and why this is a really important document in a bit. But before I do that, I kind of want to walk you through the different application documents. So your application is going to consist of kind of 2 chunks of documents. And as you're looking at getting your proposal ready and started, I would first recommend reaching out to a lender if you're looking at getting documentation from a lender, or if you are going to be self-financing, you're going to want to have bank statements and have those be within the past 30 days. Or if you're a developer that is selling a property, we also accept pending listings with the expected amount of net sale proceeds as a way to demonstrate financing. And typically that's kind of one of the more time-intensive steps in the process is getting your documentation financing ready so that you're able to fill in the pro forma that we're going to walk through here in a little bit. So I tend to recommend that once developers or applicants have an idea of kind of what they want to develop, whether that's a single family home or a duplex or whatever it would be, that they then reach out to a lender to find out on documentation of financing. And like I shared in the presentation, we do have lists of lenders that you could reach out to. And then kind of next is really getting an idea of what your construction plans are going to look like. And so we do ask you for construction documents. They don't have to be full architectural drawings, but we want to get an idea of what your project's going to look like and how it's going to sit on the lot that you're proposing to develop on. And so that includes things like floor plans, your proposed layout on the lot, and then elevations, which an elevation is basically a drawing of the exterior of your home, so like the front and the rear. And we actually do submit those documents, the elevations at least, to the neighborhood, and they go through a review process as well. So it's important to have those documents. And that may involve reaching out and working with an architect. And so that's why I also recommend kind of getting that in order. And then your plans are also going to kind of determine what your estimated value is. And that's kind of the next thing that's important. So far I've talked about documentation of financing and then mentioned construction plans. And then the next thing is getting a value appraisal to support the estimated value of your property. And why that's important is because that value is going to determine how much financing you need from the city. So that can be done in 2 different ways. You can get a broker's price opinion. So that would be a real estate broker provides you an assessment of what they think the value of your development would be based upon what you're planning to build, the number of bedrooms, and then the market area, so based on kind of the lots you're looking at. And that can be done through an appraisal as well. But generally speaking, a BPO is a less expensive and intensive process. We do accept a BPO application, so that's what we tend to get first. And then
Kevin, really briefly, can I interrupt you? There's a question that was submitted. Where can you get lot dimensions?
That is a great question, and I will admit I don't have a great answer about it being comprehensively available, and I'm guessing that's what the question is about, because our list has the square footage, and I'll open it again, but unfortunately it doesn't have, oops, that's the wrong document. It does not have the feet of the width by the depth. And I have reached out to our IT team on getting that up, but to be totally honest, I don't know if that's going to happen in time. So if it is a kind of a workaround, what I would recommend doing is if you're looking for like the specific dimensions of the lot, Hennepin County on their property tax records, which you can just search Hennepin County property info, does it have that available? And Roxanne, if you have a better idea than that, I am certainly open to your thoughts as well. But that's a workaround that I have been kind of recommending.
I would say that's appropriate, and the city also has a property information search website, so I'll put both of those in the chat.
Great. Yeah, I apologize. I actually wasn't aware if that was available externally, so it sounds like it is. Thank you. And so kind of going from there, so just to sort of reiterate, because that was a lot of information, sort of when you're thinking about applying, steps are getting your documentation of financing, and we'll go through the pro forma and look at like what you would need to show is the amount of financing. Then getting an idea of what your construction plans look like, then reaching out to a real estate broker or an appraiser to get an estimate of value. And then from there is when I would actually recommend jumping in and starting to kind of fill in the pro forma and the application itself. And let's open the application document because it has a checklist. And I think for a lot of individuals that are getting started out, there's a lot of info on this webpage, and I know it's kind of hard to navigate, and it's kind of hard to know, okay, what all do I need to submit? So we actually have a checklist on this document for that specific purpose. So let's make sure that's showing. So this is our Minneapolis Homes financing application. So if you're doing a 1 to 20 ownership project, this is the document you'd be completing. This chart here is just showing that if you're looking at doing rental development, that's through a different application process. So we want to make sure that's really clear. And on the second page of this document, I'm going to zoom in so it's a little bit more visible here. We've actually got an outline of the different application sections. So there are 6, as you can see on the left, and then the required documents for each of those kind of different project pathways. So there's 2 pathways through Minneapolis Homes financing. The first one is if you're looking at building or rehabbing a 1 to 20 unit ownership project. And then the second is if you're either a ownership household that owns a property right now and needs help stabilizing your household to remain in the property, or if you are a renter that's looking to purchase your home, that's the stabilization pathway. And there are a couple of different sections depending on that. I'm guessing most people on this call are focused on this build a new construction or rehab section. So you can use this as a guide to show which sections of the document you need to complete for this application, but then also below, we've got this additional attachment section. And so this is showing you what you would need to attach with your application when you're submitting it. So as I kind of walked through before, we would want to see a value document. So that's either that appraisal or BPO, that documentation of financing. And then if you're looking at buying city-owned property, there is an offer to purchase document as well. If you're looking at building on privately owned property, we would want to see some documentation that you own the site or purchasing the site. So that would be like property tax records that shows you as the applicant are purchasing the property. or if you have a purchase agreement in place or something like that, and then the plans. So then when you're going and filling out this document, I kind of want to give some recommendations. So project composition, this is where you're really describing your proposal. So provide a description of what you're intending on building. And then I'm also recommending that if applicants are applying and they list, and they're applying for multiple projects or multiple project sites, they list the order that they would like them to be awarded if they're not awarded all projects, so we know what your priority is. So an example is, let's say a developer applies for 3 projects and another developer applies for some of those same lots. You may not be awarded all those lots if you score or approve through our application process. So we want to kind of be able to prioritize based upon which lots you think are most feasible for your project. And then one thing to also keep in mind is that who's applying is also who is going to be on the contract. So we have had some applicants ask who the application should be under, and typically that's who's financing the project. So if a developer is partnering with a homeowner to build or a would-be homeowner to build a home, and the developer is the one getting the construction financing, they would include their information here and then describe that they're building for an income eligible buyer here. And then we asked some general questions just to kind of learn about your organization or you as the applicant if you're an individual. And then these questions 8 through 13, if you're new, you may or may not be able to answer them. We do recommend that you do so if you're able to answer, because it helps us know your past experience and who you serve, but it's not required. Strongly encouraged. And then the rest of the application is broken into sections based upon kind of your project type. And I'm not going to go too deep into those different application sections because I want to make sure we have enough time to go through the pro forma and then answer any questions. But then we do have you do things like describe the number of units and then which income range you're targeting. And then just keep in mind when you do apply and say, let's say you're going to serve a 60% AMI household. So your contract would reflect that you're serving a 60% AMI household for that unit. So you want to make sure that you're being clear about that. And then we asked some questions about if you're incorporating any like optional design features. And then if you're doing stabilization versus new construction, that's this section. And just a acknowledgement that you understand there are some requirements that come with city projects. And I can kind of talk through those a little bit here after we go through the pro forma if time allows. But generally speaking, it's they're the kind of the heavier hitting requirements come in if you're doing a larger project. So if you're doing like a single family home, for the most part, these may or may not apply. And then if you're working with a household, so let's say you're a developer and a household is working with you to build them a home and they're income eligible, they would complete the certification section. And so this is the application, and just kind of the key takeaway is that checklist on page 2 and going to page 3 is really helpful. And not every section of this application is required depending on your type of application you're applying for. So definitely follow that checklist. So why don't we jump into the pro forma, but I want to take a second and see if there are any questions about anything we just covered before we do that. So just as a reminder, you can type in the chat box, or you can dial *6 to unmute yourself if you are calling in.
And this is Roxanne. If you are on your computer and you'd prefer to call in, then you can call 612-276-6670 and use conference ID 558-5 583-534#. We recognize calling in might be easier if you have a more complicated question. And we'll wait for just another minute or two. I don't see that there's questions that are pouring in at the moment, Kevin.
That's totally fine. And I'm also definitely happy to take one-on-one questions here later as well. So my direct city cell phone number, if at a later time, probably not tonight, but tomorrow or next week or whenever those questions pop up, if you wanted to reach out to me directly and talk about your specific project, is 612-357-1505. Otherwise, that Minneapolis Homes email address we referenced a couple times is really helpful. So with that,
real quick, we just did get a question. Do you get extra points if you identify a potential buyer ahead of time?
Great question. So we don't award extra points for identifying a buyer ahead of time. And generally speaking, how our program has worked in the past is we have had a applicant, which is a developer, come and apply, and then we have requirements that they affirmatively market the property, which means listing it on the MLS for a period of time and accepting offers through that process. We did collapse a different program component into Minneapolis Homes financing this year, and that's allowing for income eligible home buyers to build a new home through this program and request financing. And that's not going to get extra points. It's just an optional pathway. And that's something that that can be done through this program. You just want to make sure that the buyer definitely does income qualify. And then if you're a developer that's going to be working with a home buyer, you do also want to be aware that, let's say you're building the home and that buyer falls through, then we would require you to go through that marketing requirements and sell to an income eligible household. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. So here's kind of the meaty document.
And we have,
I know.
Sorry, Kevin, we have one more question. How long does it take to get approval or to know whether you've been awarded or not for a potential lot that you apply for?
Yes. Also a really good question. So I will be the first to admit that our processes have some layers, and so it's not the quickest process. So if you are an individual looking to build a new home, this is a great opportunity, but it's not going to be the quickest one out there. So with that being the case, our process is that we receive your applications on the 17th. We check in the applications and then do a review to make sure they're complete and they have all the necessary items. And then we traditionally give applicants about a week to submit any missing items, because we do realize that there are a lot of documents and sometimes things just get missed. And we also want to try to be as inclusive as possible. From there, we then do a scoring committee, which probably is going to take place in late March. And then there's some additional kind of deliberation that has to happen after that point. And so it's likely that we're going to go to City Council for approval in late April or possibly early May. So just kind of keep that in mind. You're submitting your application in February, but there are some internal processes we have to go through that prevent us from doing an approval until that April-May timeframe. And one of those processes is sending your drawings for the exterior of your home to the neighborhood. They get 45 days to review and then provide a comment to the city on whether or not they're supportive or not of your development. And they may invite you to one of their meetings. So keep that in mind. And from there, so let's say if you're approved at City Council, and let's just say it happens in late April. So if you're approved in late April, the next step for us is to contract with you. Our hope is that we would be able to do that kind of within about a month. And so then you would have a contract with the city there kind of in late spring. And then there's a due diligence period that you have where you're gathering finalized documentation, finalizing those construction plans so they're full architectural drawings. You have to do a bidding process for if you are getting a general contractor or subcontractors. And then you have to submit those bids to the city along with like your scope of work, and then a finalized budget. And that's where we're like setting what your final kind of budget would be for constructing the home. And then you actually close on city financing. And generally speaking, we give developers about 6 months from our approval time at city council to then close on financing. And then if you're purchasing the lot from the city. So generally speaking, let's say you're applying in April, you may not actually be beginning construction until late summer or early fall. We tried to time it so that you could do so before the ground freezes. And if you're awarded and if you're a newer developer, I like to sit down with you as well as some of our other staff that would be working with you, like our construction management staff, to kind of walk you through, it's called our housing development checklist, and kind of explain the process to you. But generally speaking, that's kind of the process. And I know that's a lot of information. So if you have any other specific questions or you want to walk through that one-on-one, I'm happy to do that too. And with that, I think that was are there any other questions, Roxanne? Otherwise, I'll jump into the pro forma here.
So there's a question. What if we get approved for the site and funding, but we run into issues with LUA and PDR? I'm guessing that has to do with land approvals that result in having to build less units or make the development no longer feasible.
That is definitely a good question, especially as our zoning administration department has made some changes. What I recommend is that if you have questions related to whether or not what you're proposing is eligible, you reach out to zoning administration. And the easiest way to do that is if you're in the city of Minneapolis, is calling 311. And there's a number for outside of Minneapolis. I apologize, I'm blanking on it right now. And that number, or you can email Minneapolis 311 at minneapolismn.gov and ask your question as well. We're definitely recommending that the developers that have questions like that reach out to them to kind of clarify before application. Because one of the challenges that we have is once you are approved by city council, that kind of sets the financing and funding we can provide. There may be flexibility where you have to change up the site design as an example or something like that, that we can continue to move forward. But if there's significant changes, it may require going back to council for a change approval. And that's something we like to avoid if possible. So it's definitely recommended if you can to kind of do that due diligence upfront ahead of time. And Roxanne, you're typing furiously, so.
Oh, sorry about that. I will.
Yes.
I will mute. I'm typing responses to the questions as you're answering them. Sorry about that.
Sounds great. No, not a problem. And I am going to assume that the silence means we don't have any other questions, but Roxanne or anyone else, feel free to interrupt me. So I'm going to walk through a example project pro forma. So this is the city's pro forma. Sometimes we have developers submit like their own pro formas. We want you to use the one that's on the city's webpage. And Roxanne, you're unmuted. So is there a question?
There is. How long do you have to finish the project once awarded?
Good question. So that it will vary a little bit by the project type, but let's just say you're doing a single family development. So as an example, you would have a year from closing to complete the project. And then you have 6 months prior to closing on financing with the city to get your due diligence ready. So effectively from the point you sign the contract from the city until when it needs to be occupied by an income eligible buyer is that would be 18 months in total. And that includes that due diligence period before closing and then a year for construction and sale. Good question. The pro forma is a city document that we have. And so you would put on that pro forma the name of your project if it has one. If you don't, that's totally fine. You can just put the project address. And then we're going to kind of want to see if you're doing a for sale ownership type of development. So that's the most typical that we see. Ownership with rental units is allowed. So that would be like a duplex where an individual is buying that project or that home once you put it for sale, and then they have a unit that they're anticipating renting. We're not expecting to see a lot of proposals for that necessarily because just the economics of having an income eligible buyer purchase a duplex or a triplex and rent it out might be challenging, but it's definitely something that we would like to see, and we're continuing to evaluate that type of project. And then stabilization proposals. So that's an owner occupant that needs help staying in their property. For example, they need a gap from the city to help reduce their mortgage so that their mortgage payment is lower and they can continue to pay and live in the property. So that would be an example there. But for the one that I'm going to do today, we're going to look at for sale ownership because that's the most typical. And then we're also going to pretend it's a single family home because that's also kind of most typical. But you can do more than one unit. This program provides financing for up to 20 units. And so the pro forma itself is broken into a couple sections, and then there's an application budget, closing budget, and final budget. So you're doing the application budget right now, and then the closing budget is when you, after you're awarded, you're completing due diligence before you're closing on financing from the city. And then once you built and sold the home, that would be your final budget. One thing about the city's gap financing is that we're providing it as a 0% interest deferred loan. And it can be the first source of financing into your project. So what that would mean is once you close on financing from the city, you can submit a draw to cover any costs that you've had that are eligible. And we encourage you to do that before drawing against construction financing that you may be using that has interest, because that would then save cost over time for your project. So in this example, the lot is $20,000. So that would be what you would put in the acquisition cost. And then closing fees, so like title, that would be what you'd be putting here. And so that's your total acquisition. So in this example, it's $22,500. Then we want you to provide an estimate of hard construction costs. And this is also why it's important to either have experience with development or work with somebody that does have that experience, because you want to provide an accurate estimate of what your costs are going to be. In most cases, you're probably not going to be doing demo, but that is a line item if there is some demolition there. And then we want to see what your construction contract is. So if you are let's say you're a general contractor that's applying to build a home through the city program, and you're going to be operating as the general contractor, we also want to see what your fee that you're charging as a general contractor is. But if you are going to be like bidding out for a general contractor, then you don't need to worry about this line number 5. So in line 4 is where you're putting your construction contract amount. And then soil corrections is if, let's say, you expect, based upon the soil, that you may have to compact the soil or something like that, because maybe there was a prior structure on it before and the fill isn't compact enough or strong enough to support a foundation. So that would be what you would put there. And then contingency is basically an amount that covers unforeseen overages on your project, so things that happen that were not expected or unforeseen during the project, and there's a cap of 5%. And I would encourage you to put this because there often are things that happen during projects that come up, and this does impact the amount of gap you're requesting from the city, as does anything else on this document. So then the next section is soft costs. So we just did hard costs, and that's and soft costs are different because these are things like your architectural design fees, and then you're going to be working with a energy rater, and that's someone that does an assessment to see how much energy use your home uses. And why that's important is our program does have some requirements about how efficient the home is and the design that's required. So it's important to engage an energy rater in that process when you're looking at doing your final architectural drawings, so that you're making sure that you're compliant with that requirement. A survey would be basically a surveyor is somebody that does a measure and assessment of the lot, and then provides the document for that. And that would be something you would want to include, as well as any interest that you anticipate incurring during construction. So how the city's financing works is we're providing gap financing. We're not necessarily financing your entire project. And so let's say you are, in this case, you're building a $375,000 total development cost to build. And then the sales price at fair market value is $300,000. The city can help fill that gap between that 375 and that 300,000, and that's what we call project gap. And that's a portion of the financing you may be requesting from the city. And then we also have affordability gap as well. And I'll kind of talk through that, what those amounts are here in just a second. But for the amount of the cost that is not provided by the city, you're going to want to get outside sources of financing. And that financing will likely, unless you're using your own funds, come with interest. And so that's what's going in this line item. They're generally speaking, real estate taxes aren't too high at this point because vacant lots don't really have a lot of them, but you are going to have to insure your property. So that's builder's risk insurance and workers' comp insurance. And there's going to be some costs related to that. So you want to make sure that that's in there. And then there's also some additional title and recording fees. And then generally speaking, projects do have some utility costs. So that's going to be things like heat and electric while you're doing construction, and then property maintenance as well. So green certification relates back to that energy rater. So if you're doing certification through that, there might be some costs related to that, and you want to make sure that you're getting that in there. And then closing costs with the sale to the buyer, you might be covering some of their closing costs. And so you want to include that in here as well. And then we've got a couple areas where the pro forma does some auto calculations in addition to these two fees up here. And one of those is for your marketing, staging, and realtor costs. So you're allowed to charge 7% of the total sales price of the project as realtor fees. So in this example, that ended up being $16,500 in realtor fees, which is fairly typical. And I'll go on to the ownership tab here in a second and show how it's calculating that. And so that resulted in a total soft cost of $34,000, which there's a cap. Your soft cost can't exceed 50% of the total development cost. So then scrolling down, so you as a developer, how are you getting paid for the project? Typically, you're charging a developer fee. And so there's a line item on this pro forma for the developer fee, and it has a cap of 10% for projects that are 9 units or If you look here in this area in red, it shows you which cells are actually calculated in that fee in this final, and that's based on this final column, but you can kind of use that as a reference. And so then in this example, this home costs $375,000. The next sections that you're completing then are your interim financing and your permanent financing sections. So interim is how you're financing the project during construction. So in this case, the project needed $75,000 of project gap from the city, and then it also needed $27,500 of affordability gap. And I'll show how we got to that number. It's actually on this ownership tab. So in this project, its appraised value is $300,000. But based upon the max affordable price, which is on that chart I referenced earlier, that max affordable sales price chart, the max buyer estimated mortgage is $272,500. So in order for a buyer to afford the $300,000 sales price, they're going to need $27,500 in affordability gap financing from the city. So as part of your application, you're requesting the $75,000 that we referenced earlier, plus that affordability gap of $27,500 for a total amount of $102,500. And then that amount goes right here. So that's your gap financing. And then how you want to then look at this is you're saying, okay, I'm getting $102,500 from the city, and it costs me $375,000 to build this home. So I know that I need to get construction financing to do that. So in this particular example, the developer would get $228,400 of construction financing through a construction loan. And then one thing that some developers do is they actually do deferred soft costs, like their developer fee and their realtor fee, because these costs, so the developer fee and the realtor fee, are typically paid at the end of the project. We're not paying you like the developer fee at the start, it's after you complete the project. And so you can defer those costs, and it reduces the amount of actual financing you need to construct it. So as you can see here, this $44,100 is the combination of the deferred realtor and developer fees. And then this permanent financing section is when you're selling the home to an income eligible buyer. You are listing that $75,000 of project gap, which is actually forgiven if you're selling it to an income eligible buyer. And then the buyer is going to then get $27,500 of affordability gap assistance as a down payment and closing cost loan, if it's recapture, to help them fill in the difference between that mortgage that they can qualify for, which is this, and the actual sales price, which is that $300,000. So that was kind of like a quick run through. If you're doing a rental project, or sorry, ownership, and you have a rental unit, we're going to want to have you complete this as well. And then if you're doing stabilization versus the development of a new construction for sale, you would do this section instead. But I think for most applicants, they're going to be going through and doing this tab plus the project budget tab. So I think with that, I'm going to stop here and then answer any additional questions that have come up.
There was a question that was asked about whether a nonprofit can apply for subsidy to build units to rent to clients who have income at or below 50% AMI. And I already responded while you were presenting, Kevin. If the project is all rental, then it would be possible for either a nonprofit or a for-profit to apply through the Missing Middle Rental Pilot Program, which has different forms than what Kevin has been focusing on and walking us through. And I included a link in the Q&A for that program. If the intention is to do a mixed owner-occupied and rental home then the owner occupant needs to be below 80% of area median income, and the application would be through the Minneapolis Homes financing program, which has been the focus of the presentation today. And are there any other additional questions? I don't see that we have a big queue in the Q&A. All right. Kevin, do you want to go ahead and say your phone number one more time, and then I think we can go ahead and head out.
Sure. So my phone number is 612-357-1505. And then if email is preferred, mplshomes@minneapolismn.gov is where you can email, and I'm monitoring that inbox, so I will reply from there. And like I said, I'm definitely happy and willing to kind of take one-on-one questions here over the next couple of weeks. Our application is due on the 17th. And if you're putting things together, but you're not quite ready to kind of jump in, but you still think that this looks like something that you'd like to participate on in the future, this is a program that we typically do on a yearly basis. So this isn't going to be the last opportunity. And with that being said, we also may be doing another round of financing here later this year. It's something that we're actively talking about. It will be determined somewhat by the applications that we receive this round, but I think there's a good likelihood that we'll be doing another application. So if you're kind of still putting things together, and maybe you're kind of putting your development team together, or you want to review the DTAP stuff a little bit beforehand, before kind of jumping in, that's totally fine too. And I'm happy to kind of answer questions as you're going through that as well. And there will be other opportunities too. So this isn't like the last one that's out there. But if you do think you're kind of ready to jump in and help us build affordable housing, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
We do have one additional question that came in. If you sell the home for more than you thought, who keeps the additional funds?
That's a good question. So when you're applying, the amount that you would be selling for to the home buyer is going to be based upon that affordable sales price. So if the market has gone up substantially, your project gap need from the city is going to be lower, because the gap between your total development cost and the fair market value is going to be lower. So what you would then be doing is providing more of that gap is down payment assistance and closing cost assistance to that buyer to help them fill in the difference. And I think that answered the question, but Roxanne, feel free to add any other detail.
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, our program makes a funding commitment based on what you believe you will need at the time that you apply, just like Kevin was framing. And then at the end of a project, we do something called a final reconciliation process, where we look at what your total development costs actually were, what your sales price actually was, and what the amount of funding that your home buyer needed in order to afford the property actually was. And if there are significant differences, you know, from what you projected you thought you would need to what you actually need, then any excess resources are returned to the city and then reinvested through for future funding rounds. But one of the things that's shifted about our program, we do allow for you know, if you thought that you needed more project gap and now you need less project gap and need more affordability gap, we do allow for that flexibility in the program, which accommodates for the rise in home prices. I hope that answered the question. Are there any additional questions at all? I don't see any in the queue, but we'll pause for just a moment to make sure. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and we look forward to your proposals.
Yes, thank you.